Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. Today is a double upload day, so if you've missed the other video of today regarding CEO pay, I think it's one of the most important ones I've ever done. I highly recommend checking it out. As for today, well, BioWare have decided to ban a streamer for opening a bunch of chests. Does that seem like a massive news story? On the face of it, not really, but it actually does bring up a few things that are fun discussions for us, but challenging problems for game developers, additionally highlighting fundamental problems with Anthem, problems which have also been brought up by Travis Day, an ex-Blizzard developer who worked on Diablo 3, including the great loot revival of its Reaper of Souls expansion pack. Hell, by the end, I'll even have some dastardly PR tips for them, as well as a rough currency value on the amount of free negative press that they managed to generate through this action. So, first, what actually happened? Well, a streamer by the name of Glad was banned from Anthem. Who is Glad? Why was he banned? Well, the why follows from the who, and that's not because he is a controversial figure. He's the kind of guy who plays games with an eye towards efficiency, being well known for, say, how he tackled Destiny 2 with particular vigor. If there's a fast way to do something, he's the type of guy to do it, and personally, that's pretty in line with how I play a lot of games like this as well. As for Anthem specifically, well, he has long been a supporter of the game leading up to its release and even post-launch, specifically saying that he was planning to play it pretty hardcore and really get into the gear grind. Upon hitting endgame, he started doing the typical things. Strongholds on Grandmaster 1 difficulty, that kind of thing. Really the bread and butter endgame that people do to get Masterwork gear, with Masterwork gear being the game's highest quality of loot. Well, he heard through Reddit that you could farm chests in freeplay mode just by flying around and opening them up, and you could do that on Grandmaster 1 difficulty and have a chance of getting Masterwork gear. Now, he said that when he did this, it felt quite strong and eventually did get nerfed after a day. So what people would do is they'd draw up a route, they'd fly around that route, they'd pick up the chests that they would find, and he believes that that is the reason why he was banned for the game, especially because he was doing it with a big audience, with BioWare saying that he was banned for economic exploitation. Past that, though, there were a few times that he ran into bugs, such as being able to continually use the Storm Javelin's ultimate ability, though he even tweeted that at the dev saying it was a problem, and the third one was farming a boss, which is something that you'd normally do in an RPG, but there was a bit of a respawn problem, but he only did it for a short time, opting to do other content instead. So, the next day, after all this went down, he logged in to find that he had been banned from the game, leading to him creating a video about the issue, and then a host of other video makers and articles covering that as well, leaving us with both a surface level and deep topic to talk about. Starting off with the basics. Yeah, this literally is just a guy flying around a game world picking up chests. That's it. Being banned for that is frankly absurd, and it's absolutely beyond what other developers would do. For example, a creative use of the movement mechanics and an understanding of the raid layout of Destiny 2 Forsaken's first raid would allow people to do chest runs of the raid, getting a pretty darn good amount of gear on a weekly basis. Did people get banned from that? I actually don't think they did. It was just part of the game as Bungie had implemented it. Moving over to, say, World of Warcraft, well, there is an everlasting war between the developer and the farmer. A war that almost never results in bans. People would normally find a really strong farming spot, and they would maybe farm it for a few days and then find that Blizzard would nerf it. And that pretty much would be the height of things. Blizzard would typically not ban people for that type of behavior. Now, behavior, that is the key word here. Player behavior is typically shaped by game systems. In many ways, studying what people do is the study of incentives, and that is especially true for loot shooters like Destiny, Division, and Anthem. The actions of Glad are shaped by the rules of the game in which that gameplay is taking place, and that's why we need to talk about the absurdly poor loot design of Anthem and Diablo developer Travis Day's take on the whole situation. Now, Travis did say he's enjoying Anthem quite a bit, there's a lot of the core that he really likes, but given his experience, he was able to succinctly point out a number of flaws in the game's current loot system. Now, these are the type of things that will be readily apparent to people who make and play MMORPGs and other loot-based games on a regular basis, but seemingly they did not occur to BioWare. The first problem that he identified was, well, dead items, i.e. an item that rolls with stats that are totally useless. For an example, an item that maybe actually does poison damage, but that rolls with a bonus to physical damage. Day says that while suboptimal rolls are quite normal in a loot-based game, having a high number of things that simply do not work is a big problem for player confusion, and he argued that rather than having a massive pool of rolls per item, it might be better to change the weighting of a lower number of affixes, or maybe having it so that items would drop from, with say, between 2 and 4 affixes, with those affixes always being in some way useful to the item. Now, the next problem that he identified really is the kicker. The game has 3 strongholds. Now, strongholds are basically raids, but all of the strongholds drop the same quality of loot. They don't actually have specific items, yet the Tyrant Mine Stronghold, the first one from the demo, is significantly easier and faster than the other two, with Day saying that the first time he went into the Heart of Rage, the boss took 30 minutes to go down. They essentially have tiered dungeon difficulty, but all the dungeons drop the same quality of reward. What does that mean? Well, it obviously means that people will all funnel into the fastest, the most simple one, which is the Tyrant Mine, effectively making an already sparse endgame roster of content feel significantly smaller in effect. The solutions are pretty simple. You want to maybe rebalance them or maybe put better loot in the harder strongholds. Essentially, a bunch of their problems really compound to make the end game for many efficiency-focused players be wholly focused on the Tyrant Mine. And this is a perfect example of how game systems shape player behavior, leading to situations like Glad deciding to instead do the chest run, which certainly does seem to be a nice break in pace from grinding out the same stronghold over and over and over again. BioWare really have managed to mess up the basics here, creating a reward and difficulty system that is just quite terribly designed. Even with difficulty, well, the difficulty is just a massive damage and health scale to the point where players actually farm Grandmaster 1 because doing Grandmaster 2 and 3 is, well, it's actually doable, but it simply just takes too long because the health pools are so large. You know, there's a phrase, don't attribute to malice what can be better explained by incompetence. I'd argue for an extension. Don't attribute to incompetence what can be easily explained by looking at the circumstances in which the people involved were operating. So with Anthem, it seems to have been in development hell for quite some time. All signs point to this game not being quite ready for launch. These designs feel half-baked, I would imagine, because they literally are. Essentially, it seems like much of this game came together late in the day, with BioWare being forced to launch with what they had, not being able to get another launch date extension. Now, if Andrew Wilson was correct when he said that Anthem's 2019 delay was purely based off portfolio balance concerns, and that the game was otherwise done, well, that does reflect very poorly on BioWare. But still, when you look at the evidence, I think it's safe to say that Wilson wasn't really telling the truth there. These problems are typical of something that really was rushed out before it was ready, ultimately causing great harm to both the player and the developer. Still, BioWare's response to this use of game mechanics was a poor move indeed, especially since the nerf had already been implemented by the time the ban actually happened, and given their overall PR situation with Anthem, it's a bad tactical move, and no doubt the PR people are banging their heads off the table. The developer-streamer relationship is certainly something that's very interesting in our modern industry, and it somewhat reminds me of the Wreckful/Blizzard situation where a player called Wreckful was banned for account sharing. Really, he was kind of banned on a technicality. Now, account sharing is against the terms of service, but of course, if anyone actually looks at what was actually happening on his stream, you'll know that he was really banned because he was using T-Morph, which is very against the terms of service. He was using T-Morph, which is like an actual tool, publicly, and it was very much Blizzard sending him a message. And I've even heard from ex-Blizzard staff that that is what they were doing. So that's an example of Blizzard banning a streamer not only for breaking terms of service, but more importantly, as a large public statement to that streamer's audience. Now, was that a good idea? Was it not a good idea? It's kind of hard to tell. I think it may have ended up being a net negative for Blizzard because a lot of Wreckful's viewers were like, well, you know what? I guess we're not playing well then. Now, it could be that BioWare pretty much just overreacted to what Glad was doing, revealing him sort of revealing the broken nature of these chests so publicly on his stream and banning him to send a message. But if that is the case, it's tremendously short-sighted, and it's a decision that could not have been made by somebody with a tactical mindset, really. When it's all said and done, this situation will have, I'd estimate, generated 2 million YouTube views. most of those views are not going to have a positive outlook for the game. And the number of views there, like to a PR agency, could be worth £80,000, maybe £100,000 in sponsored videos, full sponsored videos, or maybe a third of that number if it was just like integration shoutouts. Now that's just to put a currency value on like how much negative free press they managed to generate for themselves through this. And I think people really need to think about that over at developers when they make decisions like this, because sometimes you've got to bend the rules to be pragmatic. And I mean, it might be a bit evil, but sometimes that's just the way to get stuff done. Ultimately, the games press and the pundit scene is absolutely predictable. We really are predictable, and it's clear that that predictability honestly could be exploited by companies when they think about their communications policies. And I mean, yeah, I'm totally giving these guys free tips here, but seriously, we are that predictable. But most of the point here is just about how companies often seem to misunderstand player behavior, both as expressed through their engagement with game mechanics and their activities outside of those games. And I think this is a pretty perfect encapsulation of that in some ways reminds me of the Fallout 76 situation with the player who had played for 900 hours and was banned for having too much ammo. It's just one of those things where even if you technically were right in banning that person, you know what? Maybe it's a bad strategic move to do so when you think about your long-term PR outlook. So there you go, that's it for this video. If you'd like to check out more stuff, there is that video about CEO pay that's actually going into, a more reality-based approach, let's just say, than unfortunately what a lot of the game's sort of journos ended up doing. So yeah, you can check that out as the next video. I'd really recommend watching it. And with that, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.